everybody. Thank you so much for staying with us for the session titled Europe as a Lighthouse in the Storm, How to Pave the Way for Peace. My name is Alena Kudzko. I'm Vice President of GLOBSEC. Let's put the session today into a broader context. We Europeans have been thinking that over the past year, we have been laboring very hard to make sure that there is a possibility for peace in Ukraine. Yet what we have right now, we have countries like China or Brazil who are coming up and saying that while others, including Europeans and Americans, have only been adding oil to the fire, we have a peace plan. And of course, there are peace plans and the insistence that there should be immediate cessation of hostilities and fighting sounds a little bit magical if you look at the realities of the Russian aggression. There is an easy catch to them, and it flies. So today at the session, we're going to focus on two specific issues. First one, what is the substance of European plan, how to make sure there can be peace in Ukraine? And second part, how we can reclaim the narrative and make sure that our ideas are understandable. Luckily, I have a fantastic panel to discuss these issues with me. And I'm going to start with Baroness Catherine Ashton, who served as the High Representative for the EU for Foreign and Security Policy. Baroness, let's imagine that you are back in the position, and you're standing next to President Lulu and President Xi Jinping at a press conference. Your counterparts just finished their pitch for the peace plan in Ukraine. What is your response? What Europeans want to do to make sure that there can be peace in Ukraine?
I think the first thing is to remind them that this is for the people of Ukraine to determine their future. It's not for anyone to impose or put forward ideas that may look good on paper but don't actually fit with the reality. And we have the ambassador from Ukraine with us in the audience today. It's wonderful to have you here, sir. It's really important to, having noted that, to then recognize that any peace plan is not just about ending the war, it's about the next 20, 30, 50, 100 years, because it's the future security of Ukraine, and I would argue the broader region that's also at stake. What's happening in Georgia, where we still have the barbed wire that moves every now and then, where the Russians are still in control of part of the country, what's happening in Moldova, with Transnistria. There are many issues to be resolved in a broader European security architecture, which should be the basis of the work that Europe is doing. But it must always go back to the fundamentals, that we have a country, a democratic country that has been invaded, that how we respond to that says a great deal about who we are, the values we hold, and the friendship that we want to share with our colleagues in Ukraine and standing with them, and to making sure that it's not about our plan, it's about a plan that is Ukrainian, where Europe is standing with Ukraine.
Thank you so much. And I want to move next to Commissioner Reding. First, Commissioner, happy birthday. But now the question. Of course, it's up to Ukrainians to decide what is the peace plan for them and on which terms they can live in peace with the neighbors. Europeans, though, have done a lot over the past year to make sure that such peace is implementable. Can you outline a little bit your perspective? What are the key elements of the European contributions to this peace? And maybe some reflections, what you think maybe Europeans are not doing enough or should be doing differently?
Well, I will follow my friend Catherine on her analysis because if you speak only about the terrible aggression against Ukraine, you miss part of the whole picture. The aggression against Ukraine, although it was prepared long ago and we didn't want so much to see, is a turning point in geopolitics. And it is a wake-up call for Europeans. You see, we Europeans are built mainly on the rule of law and on economy. So when everything goes fine, we lean back. And we have leaned back during many decades, relying on cheap energy from Russia, on cheap manufacturing from China, and on evident protection from the United States. And all of a sudden we see that that was maybe not the right way to proceed, and that we have to stand much more on our own feet and develop beyond our economic way of life and the soft power, which Catherine always puts into perspective, also a very strong defense pillar inside in NATO. Defense is not per se on the brief of the European Union. Well, health was not either. But when came the corona, what did we do? We cling together and we went together to find solution. And here, Ukraine also does the same to us. We cling together and we find solutions. My friend Jean-Claude Juncker, when he was president of the Commission, he presented a fund for having common purchases in Europe for weapons. Well, I think the member states were not so very keen on that. Now they understand we have to do it, and we are doing it. Europe needs crisis in order to advance. It has happened always, it is happening now, and it will become a stronger Europe. These elements which were not foreseen so far, not elements of aggression, but elements of defense and of being a strong, independent partner in a defense union with NATO. And I think that will definitely give to the member states and not member states who are around of us a very strong impetus. You see, the first reaction after the invasion of Ukraine was members who were completely neutral so far to join NATO. So a change of mentality has happened, and that will make a stronger Europe and more peace guarantees for the future.
Minister Korčok, I'm going to go next to you. Commissioner outlined a few things that seemed unimaginable before, but now seem to be so basic and understandable for everybody that everybody's jumping on board to implement them. You're coming from Slovakia, a country on the eastern flank, and you've been talking a lot about all those issues for some time already. What is your assessment? What are maybe some of the things that Europe can do more, better, or differently right now to make sure that there's peace in Eastern Europe?
Well, thank you. I'll come to it, but before that, I'd like to comment on what Cathy Ashton has rightly underscored, and we agree on it, namely it's up to Ukrainians to determine under what conditions and circumstances they can sign up to a peace deal. Yet, I'd like to add as well that we have to have 100% clarity and unity on our European side that nothing else than full legal and political restoration of sovereignty and independence of Ukraine is the main objective. Should we compromise on this? And that's not the case, because unity is in place, determination. But should we make a compromise over time on this? There would be a risk that we help accelerate a process of dismantling of European security order. And we should not forget that this is one of the primary Russian objectives. So what's going on in Ukraine, it's not only a breach of international law, but what is at stake, it's the order on which we depend both our prosperity and sovereignty. What else can be done on European side? I can talk endlessly about that. I think, however, it is important to remind us, and maybe we can be at this moment proud of what we have achieved so far. Unprecedented things have happened. Commissioner is right. When I was ambassador to EU, Katia, I think we've been establishing EAS.
Yes.
And at that moment, we've been trying to get in place the legislation creating EPF, European Peace Facility. Imagine that political watershed moment, I can say. We are funding now. We are funding now, reimbursing the cost for the member states, delivering military equipment which is used in a war. Had somebody told me that while we've been working on it, I said, no, that's insane, impossible. So driven by extraordinary circumstances, we are performing extraordinarily. So it's a positive point. Two, with NATO. I'm thinking in my own country a year ago that NATO troops will be stationed in the east of the country. The NATO would be present on the entire eastern flank of NATO. What more can be done? I pick up just one point. We should be faster. We should be more on time, both when it comes to financial support. I just remember, and I hope I'm correct, but last year we envisaged 9 million of microfinancial assistance to Ukraine. We only delivered 6, if I'm not mistaken, but clarify that. And number two, when it comes to military assistance. In a retrospective, you see us always, responding to very precise and specific requests of Ukrainians. Then we are pondering 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 months, and then we are delivering. We have to be much faster in that, because if we deliver, and we've delivered on everything that I have requested so far, but when we deliver late and not on time, sometimes things are happening on the ground which are irreversible, and politically we are devaluing the assistance that we are providing. I'll wrap up by saying that in Slovakia, we were the first ones, and it was very costly politically back home. I was labeled a warmonger because we were the first ones who delivered S-300 right at the beginning. And that was an initiative for others to follow. 2-3 weeks ago, we were the first ones, I think, with Poland, who delivered the fighter jets, MiG-29s. So I believe it is extremely, extremely important to maintain the assistance, but not to be late. It's difficult politically, I understand that, but this is absolutely critically important.
I get the point. So continuing being bold, but doing it faster.
Yes.
Now talking about the European External Action Service, we're lucky to have with us Ambassador Ronner-Grubačić, who is representing the European External Action Service. Ambassador, we already outlined quite a few issues that need to be done, that can be done, that have been done already. From your perspective, is there something that we're overlooking and not thinking about right now?
Thank you very much for this question. And indeed, being Ambassador for Gender and Diversity, I think that there is an additional element that we have to very much take into consideration, because this war, for one, has shown us that basically there are two battles at play, right? One is really on the battlefields with soldiers and tanks, and the other one clearly is very much with words and information. And of course, we are all aware by now that information manipulation and interference have really penetrated our public space, especially, of course, social media. But that really means that not only have we seen this fundamental change in geopolitical relations, but also really an enhanced polarization of, on the one hand, the democratic countries that uphold universality of human rights and fundamental freedoms, and on the other hand, the, illiberal countries that contest the rules-based order that we promote, and that we promote very much with our values. And what that really means is that the values that the EU stands for, but really the universal values like gender equality, like non-discrimination, diversity and inclusion, are a target now of these disinformation and information campaigns. And what that really means is, and what we have to keep in mind, is that these narratives and these operations are not gender neutral. And so what you see, for instance, is that women in public life and especially highly profiled women, politically active women, are really a target of ridicule and using very much sexualized disinformation to put them away, to discredit them in the public opinion. There are very many examples of that, but I won't go into that. But I think that it is very important to underline here that these messages are really part of the broader war strategy that Russia has engaged in. And I would warn against what you see sometimes, that people think that this is laughable or that this is not very relevant, because this is very dangerous. And that is really my main point, that what we see is that this anti-gender movement and this goal of targeting people and groups based on stereotypes of their identities with falsehoods is really an effort to roll back on universal human rights. And by doing that, it's really undermining our societies, it's undermining the social fabric of our societies, and in that sense, I think it's a direct threat to our democracies and to our functioning as EU, also as a security operator.
Thank you so much for that, Ambassador. You're absolutely right. Disinformation is yet another front, much less visible than the battlefield in Ukraine. And by the way, talking about gender and the role of women, Ukrainians have broken many stereotypes, including the one on the role of women. We see women there fighting in the army. We see women in leadership position in the government. So there is a lot for us to learn from Ukraine in this regard as well. But I wanted to follow up slightly on this element of maintaining political cohesion back at home and making sure that we're also winning the narrative at home, making sure we can sustain this bold support to Ukraine. Commissioner, I'm going to go back to you right now because that's something that you also highlighted. We need, as Europeans, stand much stronger for what we represent and how we want to see the world being shaped around us as well. What would be your action points when it comes to maintaining domestic political support for Ukraine, especially as we see populations, as it's been predicted, getting a little bit tired, but also because there are quite a lot of elections that are coming up in Europe in the upcoming months?
I have learned in politics to see the objectives and the advances and not to speak continuously about problems. Because if you speak continuously about problems, problems become bigger. But what you need to achieve is advances. And I see really that this shock of this aggression make people to understand that there are other things than the well-being of them personally at a certain moment, but that the well-being of the others also has a very important impact on them and on their future. And now something has been said which I believe for the future is of utmost importance. It has been said by the minister who explained that help is wonderful, but if it doesn't come quickly enough, it is diminished. And the ambassador told us that digital is playing an enormous role. Now, we have, I think, also understood that the wars tomorrow are going to be digital much more than with arms. And we have to be prepared. I have always argued that in the digital development, Europe has to be a standard maker and not a standard taker. But that starts now, not tomorrow, because digital is going, well, we have a problem of politics here. Digital is much more quick than politics. And that is why I wish that we should really be forward-looking and prepare tomorrow. Because disinformation, cyber security, attacks on vital infrastructure, not by arms, but by digital means, will be the future. So, one element I would like to put in. The one who is managing quantum computing tomorrow is the one who will be managing the world. So I think that our politicians also have to understand that quantum computing is not tomorrow, it is prepared today. And or we are in Europe, the forward-going, the standard makers, or we will be the poodles. And if we are the poodles, then we will have no power to preserve peace. So peace is not only a question of what we do today in solving a problem, it is what we do today in guaranteeing that our future is one where we take the decisions and not somebody else.
Thank you so much for that. I'll get back to poodles in a second, but first I want to put Minister Korčok in a slightly uncomfortable position. Luckily, probably luckily, you're not in office right now, luckily for us, because you can speak more freely. But there are elections coming up in Slovakia. We're talking a lot about maintaining public support to Ukraine all across Europe. That will definitely be a big issue in the information battlefields back at home for you and for all the Europeans and Slovaks alike. Can you tell us a little bit more what can be done, how we can better communicate to domestic publics to make sure they understand what the war in Ukraine is about and ready to do what's necessary going forward?
Yeah. Mission impossible, to say it in a nutshell here. And two, I don't want to bother you with our specifics from Slovakia, although it's true that Ukraine and support for Ukraine will be one of the most decisive issues in our upcoming early elections, no doubt about that. And self-critically, I can say that we are not doing very well in convincing our own electorate, our own people, that the support that the government is providing to Ukraine not only does not have alternative, but we are helping ourselves.
Yes.
I found myself so many times on a defensive position vis-à-vis the populists from our opposition, when I was trying to tell them why it is so important to help Ukraine defend itself. And then what came to my mind, it's an ultimate argument because we're a neighboring country. And then I realized people will understand my position when I remind them that without that support to Ukraine, Slovakia will have a new neighbor. And that neighbor will be Russian Federation, because don't forget, it's not 2014, 2022, it's the occupation of entire country. And if that happens, not only borders are changed, but we will have a new neighbor, and that neighbor will not be independent and in the future prosperous and democratic Ukraine, but it will be a totalitarian autocracy. I want to say by that that in order to sustain that, we need to develop individually, maybe specifically for each country and every audience, your own narrative by which you are able to convince your people. And second point as well, by our clear support to Ukraine, by the clarity that we have presented where we stand as a government, providing S-300 MiGs and everything, we ourselves have created an impression as if we would be helping more Ukrainians, that we are helping our own people, for example, in the context of rising inflation. And populists in Slovakia, I think in other countries as well, are getting ground. They are receiving more support. And therefore, wrapping that up by saying that, of course, while unity of 27 is absolutely key, but it is key for each and individual member states to sustain your own domestic support, because otherwise, and in view of possibly longer conflict that is ahead of us, hopefully not, but if so, it will be critically important in each and every strand of our support. I keep on talking about military support, but how about macro-financial and economic support that Ukraine needs? We will have to go to our citizens and to the government and say, okay, Slovaks, we will have to contribute with 500 million in order for Ukraine to survive, to run the state. And you are politicians, you know what it means to tell this unpleasant truth to your people in a situation where we have 15–20% of inflation in our own country. Difficult, it requires leadership and courage.
Thanks so much for that. Baroness Ashton, back to you. We started the conversation about having the internal cohesion by playing on our strength, but also, of course, the part of it is how do we convert this strength into effective tools of foreign policy making. EU has been called different things, from paper tigers, now potentially we're going to be poodles. What do you think are the foreign policy...
We don't want to become poodles.
We do not want to be, and this is exactly the question. What are the foreign policy tools that we're using rather effectively right now, including to solve the conflict in Ukraine, and what you think we can strengthen further? You can feel free to expand also on the global dimension, whether we need to do more trade, more sanctions, or whatever you think can work in this situation.
So I think the EU sometimes suffers from not understanding how strong it is. And I say that recognizing as a Brit the position of my own country, but I'm a European, and I feel very strongly that this enormous economic capacity is actually an incredibly effective tool in the context of how Europe should be operating on the world stage. And I sometimes feel that it doesn't understand, we don't understand ourselves, just how important that is. And the translation of that into hard power is not just about the capacity to support militarily, important though that is, but also that economic power is hard power when used effectively. It's not just about sanctions. They are incredibly important, but they're a means to an end, they're not an end. Sometimes we think of them as the end. We've done sanctions, job done. No, job begun, not done. And I think we need to make sure that in a European context, people together see the strength of being together and the importance of that. Secondly, it is about standing firm on the values that we all hold. Our belief in democracy, in freedom, in human rights. For human rights to apply to you, there is one criterion: to be human, nothing else. Nothing else. And so the value and importance of sticking together is not just, Viviane, as you were saying, about talking to one slice of the population of any country. It's about who we are, and it's about who we want to be. And historically, we know the challenges that will be made if we don't stick to the principles that we hold dear. So it's about Europe being a stronger, clearer entity in saying we are the strongest economic bloc. We translate that into the hard power we can use. We work together closely with our allies, not least the United States, not least NATO, not least others who join with us. We recognize that actually when we look across the world, there are many countries who should be supporting Ukraine openly, clearly, and are not, either by abstention or hiding, or even worse. And we have a big job to do to explain and reconvince them of what it is that they're seeking to do, the journey that they are on for the democratic future they say they want for themselves cannot be completed if they don't support those who find themselves being attacked for having those values, for wanting that future themselves. So it's a lot about elements of solving problems like disinformation. It is about the cyber future. There's no question where the world will be of the future, as Viviane has absolutely rightly said, and the challenges, as the ambassador said, of the disinformation that happens. But it is also, for me, about developing the new toolkit that comes out of a recognition of the strength that Europe really does have.
Minister Korčok, I'll get back to you in a second, but I want to quickly follow up with the ambassador. Of course, we're talking about the fact that we need to stick to our values. We need to, as Baroness put it, explain and reconvince also others about the values that we stand for and how these values translate for them as well. The trick, and you pointed it out, is that Russians and potentially others are doing everything possible to make sure that our message is not heard. Could you elaborate a little bit more? What are some of the solutions to the issues that you outlined, and especially how we can convert them into the global context? Because Russians are very active in countries like Latin American countries or in Africa and beyond.
Yeah. First of all, if I may, just one word about what the Slovak foreign minister just said about the narrative, because it is often being said that for a narrative to be successful, it has to have a negative element in it. That's when it catches on. It's a little bit what we've heard often, that good news is no news. And this is really one of the challenges for the EU. You know, our narrative is generally a positive one. It's about, indeed, the values that we stand for. So that is really where we see a huge challenge and where we are often forced into a position of debunking rather than indeed having our own narrative to take it forward. But one thing that we really can and that we should really do is to look for and to search a multi-stakeholder approach. It sounds like a platitude, but we really need to work together, not only as governments, but also including civil society. We need to work with online platforms. We need to work with the private sector very much. And especially the technology sector can help us to do better. And it's one of the reasons why very soon I will be having a meeting with Microsoft, also really to look at how, you know, their programming and their, but also issues of accountability and monitoring can be improved. I think this is really, really crucial indeed, looking ahead at what we can still expect now that we are really entering AI times. So we also need to support fact checkers. We need to support independent media because what we also see clearly is that their free space is already shrinking. But then, that for me is very important, we also, as governments, must be honest and recognize that everything that we are saying about the importance of integrating equality, gender, and diversity into our policy making must really be realized, because this is what we have committed to so many times, and we really must do it now.
Thank you so much. We have about 4 minutes left, so I'll try to sneak in very brief questions. But before that, I see that Ukrainian ambassador wants to jump in. Ambassador, please go ahead. I'm not sure we have microphone, but I think we can hear you.
Microphone coming.
Would be good.
There's
Microphone is coming.
Very good.
Good.
So first of all, I would like to thank an excellent panelist for this very interesting discussion and right thoughts I've heard. And I would like to, not the question, but make 3 points. Firstly, as a Ukrainian and as an ambassador, I fully agree with the statement that the Ukrainians has to decide the terms of peace and end of the war. That's what we are doing now, and there is no compromises in terms of territorial integrity and sovereignty. Secondly, this war is not about the land. This war is about principles and fundamental values that the Europe is built upon. We must prevail for those values and fundamental principles to be preserved. And this war also demonstrated that democracy, values, and principles have to have teeth, have to be defended. Because so far, you're absolutely right, Europe enjoyed and the collective West enjoyed the luxury of being peaceful and not to be challenged by the dictators such Vladimir Putin. And in order to prevail, I don't support this idea, the strategy of the 1,000 cuts. So we will fight and cut Russia slowly, and then finally the victory will be. We don't have the luxury to sacrifice human lives to pursue this strategy. And the third point is, I fully agree with the minister that the right words, statements from the European Union, from the collective West, has been said already. And the time is, and the importance is for the implementation of those bold decisions has been voiced out many times. But what is lacking is the speedy and effective implementations in many areas, not only in the military, also with the economic help, with the reconstruction, with the counter disinformation campaign, in many areas, and even with the sanctions, to close those loopholes and to deprive Russia from means to continue the war. So I fully agree with all these statements, and I really appreciate that the discussion went into the right direction, and I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ambassador. And while we have 20 seconds left, Minister Korčok, I interrupted you. You had a two-finger coming back on the global dimension and actually making a comment about what Ambassador said, that we need to make sure that this war is about principles and values. But if you want to elaborate what you wanted to say about converting it.
I think it's impossible. Time is over, and to touch upon the global dimension of this within 10, 15 seconds is impossible, but I wish we had more time to elaborate on what we call, on what became a buzzword, the West and the rest. Yeah. I think we need to pay more attention to this problem. I don't think we will resolve it. The panel that was before Mr. Venizelos has eloquently, I think, dealt with that. One minor proposal is I don't think it's fair to refer to them as to the rest. Is that okay? I think Global South, but definitely if you look at the composition of what we have in mind, when we refer to Global South, it's a major player on international scene. And the question for us is part of a lesson that we should learn, how we've been unable to deal with them in order to get more support for what the West stands for. I think we've lost momentum at the beginning of the war, not in 2022, but rather in 2014. Because we have not been able to reach out to them and convince what is at stake, not for the West, but for all of us, including them.
Thank you so much. I'm afraid we have to wrap up this panel, but we seem to be all agreeing that we need to focus right now on speedy and effective implementation and developing a new future-proof toolkit. Yes. With that, thank you so much, everybody, and we're going to proceed with the next panel. Thank you.